Humans are strange. Clicker, be careful, Quillith called out too late. He realized sadly, as the delicate sample container fell out of his assistant's manipulators, rolled to the edge of the work surface, and teetered for a moment on the edge of the abyss. It caught the diffuse light of the lab one last time and fell over the edge to shatter on the floor. I am sorry, his assistant blurted out. Oh, we only have 2 left after this. I am so sorry. Still your mandibles, Quillith said, letting his thorax slump to the floor. I should have secured it to the wall. This is my responsibility. His assistant was still keeping his legs tight to his body in a display of stress. Please relax, Quillith said, reaching over to stroke his assistant's dorsal line. This is just the sort of thing you have to learn to deal with when working on human-sized bases. We will have to clean up the broken shards, his assistant said so quietly Quillith barely concealed it. Yes, best do that before the human sees. Quillith began. Hey little buddies, a third voice startled them. I heard a crash. Everything okay? I dropped a large sample container, the assistant said, raising his voice so the human could hear him. The human's face suddenly lit up with pleasure. Quillith refused to let his legs tighten in irritation. He could sense the confusion in his assistant, but didn't bother explaining. The consequences would become obvious soon enough. Was it one of the ones with the pressure sensing lids? The human asked eagerly. It was, the assistant confirmed. And you can't use the tops on other containers, right? The human continued. That is true, the assistant said. We will recycle it. Can I have it? Then the human asked. I'll help you clean up the mess. I see no issue with that arrangement, the assistant said eagerly. If you have a use for it. The assistant turned to Quillith, and his mentor waved a manipulator in acceptance. Sweet. The human began to bustle around the room cleaning up the shattered container. What does he need? The pressure sensor for the assistant asked Quillith. Ask him yourself, Quillith suggested as he turned back to his work. I'm going to fetch a new container and the securing cables. The assistant approached the edge of the work surface and called out to the human. What are you going to use the pressure sensor for? The human grinned down at the assistant. While dumping the shards into a recycling container, he lifted up the lid. The entire thing fit easily across 2 of the human's fingers. He placed his thumb on the mechanical pressure sensor and depressed it with a loud click. The assistant tilted his head to the side in confusion. The human grinned and began depressing the sensor rapidly. The assistant stared in confusion at the clearly amused human for some time before speaking again. Why are you doing that? He asked. It's fun, the human said brightly. I used to have one of these as a kid. Got it off a drink bottle. Thanks again, little bud. The human strolled out whistling and followed by a rapid fire clicking. The assistant turned back to where Quillith was wrestling the new container into place. Don't ask me, Quillith said. Now come help me secure this one. Humans are strange. Proning. Yeah, my kids back home do that all the time, the human on the screen was saying with a smile. The girls do it more than the boys though. As you can see, the behavior is near universal in the species, the behavioral anthropologist explained as he paused the video. However, when asked to explain it, he waved his manipulators to indicate the screen as it resumed playing. Why? The human asked as its face wrinkled with that bizarre fleshy movement that defined all of the endoskeleton species. I don't know, it's fun, I guess. Fun, Quillith said, the universal catch answer humans have for all questions beginning in why. Indeed, the behavioral anthropologist agreed. However, I have a working theory that explains it. Quillith fought the urge to tighten his legs under him in irritation. Why was he here? He was here to offer social support to his fellow anthropologist, the same he expected to receive when he went on about nutrient levels in chicken soup. So he gamely focused on graphs and data his coworker displayed. You have a theory that explains the human behavior of skipping? Quillith asked politely. The behavioral anthropologist clicked eagerly and summoned 2 more screens. Quillith watched as the previous screen of one of the younger soldiers on the base moving across the exercise ground. He was neither walking nor running. Instead, he was using every alternating bipedal step to thrust himself up against the pull of the gravity well. Skipping must require a lot of calories, Quillith observed. A massive expenditure. His coworker agreed, and here is a very similar behavior that the humans recorded in wild and domestic animals. Quillith ran his primary eyes over the displays, but those are quadrupeds, Quillith pointed out, and have completely different diets. Rely on yes, the behavioral anthropologist waved a hand dismissively, but the differences in structure only serve to display the similarity in behavior. Quillith bristled in shock at the abrupt dismissal. The rudeness was, well, it was human, Quillith remembered. With a release of tension, his coworker had been among the humans the longest. It was only logical that he had picked up a few of their quirks. Quillith refocused on the screens. All 3 behaviors involved needlessly thrusting up against the central gravity. Well, Quillith summarized. He gave a short hop to demonstrate. Yes, his coworker enthused, and the humans have already described and explained the behavior in other species, but he held up his primary manipulator. They have not thought to apply it to themselves. Quillith kept his primary eyes on the behavioral anthropologist, but snuck a pair of legs under his abdomen to begin lightly tapping on the keyboard he projected there. He found himself once more grateful for learning to divide his attention so well in academy. And then I discovered the age gap, his coworker went on eagerly. Human young display the behavior near constantly, but adults only display it when they are alone or when they think there is a minimal chance of being observed by other Species Quillith gave an absent click of confirmation as the other went on, and then the mass division is quite clear among adult humans, an inverse correlation between mass and frequency of skipping. The behavioral anthropologist paused, and looked eagerly at Quillith this time, waiting the appropriate time for a response. Quillith stretched a bit, and then settled down again. I am a nutritional anthropologist, he finally said. I can draw no conclusions from your most excellent research data, my friend. It is proning, the behavioral anthropologist said with a happy titter. The humans prawn just as much as the wild quadrupeds, so your theory is that humans skip to convince predators that the caloric expenditure of catching them would exceed the caloric gain of eating them? Quillith asked. Indeed, his coworker said brightly. I see, Quillith said, tapping a manipulator against the floor thoughtfully. That does seem logical. His coworker took that as encouragement to go on, and Quillith slipped his legs back under his abdomen with a vexed click of his mandibles. He had reports to get done. Humans are strange. Sweat. Excuse me, friend, the voice came from behind him, startling the ranger from his brown study of the remaining miles of moonlike terrain they faced. Yes, friend, 57 clicks. He replied, just remembering to add in the honorific, not that he minded once you had shared a malfunctioning ship, a landing that was not a crash by a margin of a few meters per second, and the news that you were going to have to hoof or wing, in his friend's case it, 40 miles across a featureless desert to the nearest supply cache. There was no reason not to call each other friends. A ginger blur came around and focused into a fluttering bat-like creature. I suspect that your water supply is leaking, 57 clicks informed him with his horrifyingly adorable face scrunched up, and what Ma Dodge had learned was a sign of distress. Ma grunted, stood immediately, and began to shrug off his backpack. The partial shade that the rock outcropping had offered only covered him if he was sitting, but this needed attention now. Well, let's see, Ma muttered, carefully examining the mouthpiece, the tube that led to the main reservoir in his pack, and then the reservoir itself. I can't see or feel anything wrong with it, and it doesn't look like I've lost any water. Ma finally said. What makes you think it's leaking? You are covered in water, friend. Dodge, 57 clicks, insisted. Ma heard the fluttering of leathery wings and felt a velvet brush against his back before the itsy-bitsy hellbat flew around to his face and held up a dripping, wet, manipulating claw. Look at this, that's just sweat, Ma said with a sigh, slinging his pack back on and securing the buckles. Come on, I've rested enough, let's get going. I want to make another 10 miles before we make camp. What is sweat, and where is it coming from if not your water reservoir? 57 clicks demanded, fluttering around in front of Ma, his dusky ginger fur catching the dim light of the three suns. Did you read the section in our briefing about how humans achieve thermoregulation? Ma asked, already knowing the answer. No, 57 clicks replied without any seeming embarrassment. Ma sighed and shook his head as he started out. I have a set of glands that pump water out from my internal reserves, and then my skin uses the resulting temperature drop due to evaporation to pull the heat away from my internals and radiate it out into the surrounding atmosphere. Maybe not the most accurate summation, but internal biology wasn't really his specialty. He hoped he was mostly accurate, because 57 clicks was so stunned by this revelation that he waited what must have been a full 5 seconds before replying. The amount of water you must have to store would be enormous, he chattered out excitedly. I'm 90% water, Ma commented, though his training suggested this might not be strictly relevant. That is a lot of weight. 57 clicks still seemed shocked just to carry around and expend like that. Legs, Ma indicated the limbs in question. They are really good for carrying extra weight. It just seems inefficient. 57 clicks commented. Well, we can't all have sensory horns that double as thermoregulators, Ma said philosophically. They are very useful. 57 clicks agreed, hovering to preen the organs in question. His 4 rightly 2.5 sets marked him as rather young, but they were quite a source of pride to him. Ma grinned and gave a chuckle. It was going to be a long walk, and he was glad. 57 clicks was in a good mood. Humans are strange. Fireworks. Quillith, the voice sounded from around the wall of the office, and the nutritional anthropologist clicked out a response absently. The speaker fluttered into the room and came to rest across from the console, where 3 of Quillith's 8 legs were rapidly tapping away at the screen. Quillith, the hellbat, began his fur flat in some uneasy emotion. Quillith twitched in irritation and raised his primary eyes to focus on the base safety officer. Can I aid you? 5 clicks. Quillith asked. He had more experience than most at fighting the instinctual fear his species had of the hellbats, but it was still uncomfortable to be in the same room with one. How did you know that I should not have approved the cultural display today? 5 clicks demanded in a rush, his sensory horns dull with inattention. Quillith paused and pondered the question. I did not know exactly, he said carefully. I simply noted that the humans were grinning and snickering and giggling all together. Those are supposed to be an indication of pleasure and comfort. Indeed, 5 clicks hissed. However, my personal observations have indicated that if all 3 of those factors occur simultaneously, the possibility that the humans are involved in some form of dangerous mischief is high. 5 clicks gave a whistling moan and covered his sensory horns with his wings, giving the horns an absent rub. There is also an informal rule I found in a cache of human documents. Quillith continued. At the time, I assumed it was a jest, but perhaps It was in earnest, after all, what Rule 5 Clicks asked without looking up from under his wings. If the thought of something makes an adult human giggle for more than 15 seconds, it should not be allowed. Quillith replied. A sudden explosion rumbled through the base, and Quillith gripped the console in fear. What did you let them do? He demanded, when 5 Clicks didn't respond to the noise with anything other than a full-frame shutter. Fireworks. 5 Clicks hissed. They are displaying fireworks. Humans are strange.